Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May reading of Café Muse. Thank you, Michael Davis, for sharing your classical guitar music, and Henry Crawford for your beautiful photos. I'm Susan Oki, and I'm hosting tonight along with our guest co-host, Bonnie Naradze, and our series founder, Karen Alanier. Our technical guru, Henry Crawford, is behind the scenes. We're proud that Café Muse Literary Salon is in its 23rd year of outstanding programs. Tonight, we're excited to present David Baker and Carl Phillips, two highly accomplished American poets and teachers who are also close friends. Bonnie will introduce David and I will introduce Carl. We encourage you to buy our featured authors' books and to donate to Café Muse to support our literary programs. In the chat, you will find, or Henry will soon place, the links for buying their books and for making a donation to our reading series. Tonight on our Zoom platform, we offer a new feature. If you have difficulty hearing the reading, look for a gray box at the bottom of your screen labeled CC. If you click it and then choose Show Subtitles, closed captions will appear, we hope, along the bottom of the screen, transcribing what's said. You may notice that audience members have been muted. This helps ensure uninterrupted programming. Please bear with us if we do encounter a technical glitch. During the reading, you may use the chat to comment or to ask a question that our readers may answer during the Q&A period after the readings, if time permits. Our program is scheduled for 1 hour. On Wednesday, May 19th at 7 p.m., Poets versus the Pandemic will present poet Karen Alanier reading from her new book, How We Hold On, along with guest poets Mervyn Taylor and Julie Marie Wade. Our next Café Muse reading will take place Monday, June 7th, and will feature poets Tara Campbell and Meg Kearney. Once you've registered for a reading on our website, you will be notified of our upcoming programs, but you need to register each time if you want to attend to receive the Zoom link. My guest host, Bonnie Naradze, will now introduce our first featured poet.
Thank you, Susan. It's an honor to introduce David Baker, consummate poet, devoted teacher, critical essayist who excels in close readings of poems, editor, and longtime professor at Denison University in Ohio. He has also taught regularly at the Warren Wilson MFA program, mentor to many, incredibly generous with his time. He has championed the poetry of important voices through his work as poetry editor of the Kenyon Review since 1995. When writing poems, he said in a recent interview with Victoria Chang, who was a student of his at Warren Wilson, he sometimes uses open forms, sometimes tight syllabics, long sentences, fragments, varying stanzaic forms, all while striving to maintain a precision. And by precision, he also means being attentive to detail. In poetry, this means being attentive to image and behavior, as well as form and syntax. Attention is a form of love, and precision is attention's evidence. Swift, his recent volume of new and selected poems from 8 earlier collections, contains a dazzling array of forms and subjects, and sometimes draws other poets into the conversation. Baker's complex, precise poems are also imbued with his passion for ecology and his desire to bear witness to the passing environment and so much else. His poem, What is a Weed, which touches on the death of ash trees, ends like this. I pushed my daughter down the street, let go, and her laughter lit the waning trees, ash or trash, catalpa, oak, the neighborhood where she learned to fly. Then the trees grew wings. Why not say his moving elegiac poem dedicated to his father ends with a stunning line, "I turned back to the animal. No, it turned its back to me." Read his poems, hear him now, and be amazed.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, for all the work that you have done, for the introduction and all the work you do all along. I'm really grateful to be here with everybody on our little screens, and especially at Café Muse, which is connected, I know, to the Writers Center and connected to Poet Lore. I think of so many friends I have, not just Bonnie, but Rocky and Susan and Martha and Jody and more and more and more. But mainly tonight, I think about another person important to your community, and that's Stanley Plumley, who died 2 years ago and a couple of weeks, who did so much for the Writers Center and Café Muse. In fact, Stanley and I read for you all together not too many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, one of my dear friends. And I'm just as grateful to read tonight with another one of my dear friends, with Carl, who I've known for a long time and whose poems I adore. So I'm going to start with one of Stan's poems, a really old poem of Stanley's, just so we can hear him. This is from Summer Celestial. You know this book? Unbelievable book called My Mother's Feet. How no shoe fit them, and how she used to prop them, having dressed for bed, letting the fire in the coal stove blue and blink out, falling asleep in her chair. How she bathed and dried them night after night and rubbed their soreness like an intimacy. How she let the fire pull her soft body through them. She was the girl who grew just standing, the one the picture cut at the knees. She was the girl who seemed to be dancing out on the lawn after supper alone. I have watched her climb the militant stairs and down again, watch the ground go out from under her. I've seen her on the edge of chances. She fell when she fell, like a girl. Someone who loved her said she walked on water, where there is no path nor wake. As a child, I would rise in the half dark of the house from a bad dream or a noisy window, something almost like snow in the air, and wander until I could find those feet, propped and warm as a bricklayer's hands, every step of the way shining out of them. Stanley's poem, My Mother's Feet. So I want to start my own with a poem for Stanley, not about his feet, but about his hands. This is a poem called 6 Hours. When Stanley was ill in the last months of his life, I got in the car in Ohio and drove to DC, Bethesda, Frederick, to visit him in the hospital or at home several times. This is 6 hours in the last time I saw him in the hospital. His hands are folded and gathered on his chest. Each arm is a wing in stillness, tucked close. He has laced his fingers loosely over and under, like the strings of good shoes. Someone has come to check his breathing, tap the tubes, add a few numbers to the chart. We might see his father's hands in these hands. He might hold them for us, pages in a book. What book? We'd swear he moved. Now someone has opened a blind and the sun comes wild with sudden bright splashes over the room, the side table with its small cup of pills. He blinks one eye to the warmth. He's resting with his head on two pillows. Did he smile? In a poem, he calls hands requisite for reading, for holding nothing. He looks as though he's holding back breath from a wound. Or if he were standing, touching his heart to see if his pulse were secure. His hands are still, soft to touch when we touch, and dappled with the canker of field crabs in a yard in Ohio in the sun. The boy in him might pick one and throw it to scatter those blue jays back into clouds. I get to say something for the first time. I'm reading all new poems tonight. I should read from this book that Bonnie was talking about, Swift. But I'm reading all new poems, and I get to say this because I'm reading from a new book called Whale Fall, whose contract I got in the mail, in email, at 4:48 today. So it's fun to say this. The book will come out next summer 2022, and I'm reading poems from this manuscript, this book. This poem is called 9 Wild Turkeys in a Field. The book is about extinctions and what happens afterwards. It's a book of elegies and what happens afterwards. This is an elegy. When my partner Paige and I went back to her home for the first time after her mother and father died 3 years ago, died 2.5 weeks apart. This is when we went to the grave site the first time. 9 wild turkeys in a field. Come now. Could we have one more day? Have one last time. Slowly, they shuttled the cut hill. They did not stop. They did not hurry. The sound they made was like broken teeth, like a muttering inside walls. The big one in back, crossing back and forth behind the young. Could be sorrow, the feeling in the breeze, inside the trees we were feeling. She said, what meaneth that? Let the trees of the wood rejoice. For they were in the trees then, but for the big one in back, the cankered crabs grown sour along the fence line. Fog was an echo. What mean the tree? It was a filament along the fence line, the fog, and midway up the stubby trees. It was like a quiet fire had wept down to wisps, but still furling. We could hear the slow birds stepping on leaves or picking at ground stones just beyond us. There in the trees, them going up the hill. You knelt, and I dug my heel until a little hole was there, and you set your ball jar down of wildfire flowers in the hole, balanced there. You fluffed them with your fingers, got up. Could we have known? We might have said more at the time. So we put flowers down beside the one cut stone named and patient below fog and the sorrowing trees there in the field. We called it a field. It was many things. The big birds passing through. Last week in my backyard here in this little town in Ohio, my viburnum finally gave up their last blossoms. I love my viburnum. I have 5 big ones along the way there. I wrote this poem. I started the poem I'm about to read exactly a year ago because it started because of the viburnum. The viburnum were blooming, and I looked at them, and all I saw were my big bushes covered with coronaviruses. The exact same looking structure, this round thing with all of these spikes coming off of them. Couldn't believe it, how beautiful the bushes are and how exactly like that virus depiction that we see. And I began to note things in that same structure. Sweet gum balls, right? Those little naval mines that float and sink, submarines. This poem is about all these likenesses, all these things that look alike, but mainly COVID. This is a poem called 19 Spikes. It's in 19 couplets. A poem of likenesses and repetitions. Everything I say again. There's one kind of barn and another kind of barn. There's one kind of storm and another kind of storm. And there are lots of voices, doctors, farmers, books in this poem. It's a hard one to hear. That's why I'm saying all this stuff. 19 spikes. Then the storm came. It raked our world with terrible teeth, then dissolved like a calcium spike back into bone. I see what you mean, but your barn's not really a barn. Old lady just sat there, married to the guy, 50 years. Wash your doorknob, your hands, triage your mail. I had a nightmare I was living my present life. Can't touch my nose. It's called resorption. What? It throbs like crickets in my ear. Your BP was what? No touching. COVID petals. She said, wash your hands. It took his body hours to work down through the corn, the quicksand weight of it. Her in her folding chair. Him with a new auger for the bin. He sort of spilled out. So the viburnum's full of little pink blooms. Bees in orbit with their spikes, their barbs, poisons, perfumes. Then the hail balls, jagged as kidney stones, half a foot of rain, trees seem to blow up, then the whole thing, whoosh. Some natural forms are so successful, they're viral. Calcium nodes on your clavicle. I see them everywhere. How small can they get? How big? Any size explodes. Is it gas? You mean the barn? Is it gas? A heat storm. One barn equals a non-SI metric unit of area equal to 10 to the negative 28 meters squared, or 100 femtometers squared, to quantify interaction of a nucleus with an electric field gradient. And branchlets are pithy, many-angled, winged, liquid amber stratofluca, surrounded by rusty, hairy bracts. Looks like a tiny naval mine between 80 and 120 spikes, terminal barbs, a special form of moored contact mine, and equipped with a plummet. He fell right through. The spikes on the outer edge of the virus particles give coronaviruses their name. sweet gum, storax, red gum, star-leaved alligator wood, limpet mine. In place of torpedoes, a silo carries 12 charges. I heard my heartbeat in my bones. A positive kill rate. Airbnb, missile silo fixer-upper, now swanky bachelor pad. Storm shelter, storage bin, your ultimate safe room. Each virus is a single pleomorphic spherical particle, satin walnut, with bulbous surface projections. I see what you mean. Wash your hands. Like that really helps. Leaves ripped clean off. It's coming back. I know. Two more. That one was a hard one to hear. This one is a very plain one. A long, long, long ago memory. You know, when memory is really just all that's left of it is music. This is a poem called We Are Gone. Even the night cooling down is slick with heat. Even the sheet we share, like a humming skin. From 3 stories up, the sounds of the street, drinkers at the curb, a wet hiss of dry tires is a rhythm through our box fan, like panting. When we sleep, it is piecemeal until morning. Listen, the years are short. They are nothing. I write each morning while you were at work. In the heat of day, I walk to the library. Cold water at the fountain, air-conditioned air, walk with a new book back in the elm-lined shade. At night, I meet you at the top of the stairs. Where are you gone, who loved me so long one summer far from home? Days are long. Even the heat is lovelier there, as memory is. We make lemonade from powder. Little wonder the years are less than a breath, like a song on the radio heard as the rhythm of languor. Whistle of the ice cream truck. Drinkers at the curb, days and nights of heat, of sex, such tenderness. When we sleep, sometimes it is to dream of the days. Where are they gone? Meeting on the stairs. Laughter and light, a small meal, a bottle of wine. When we wake, it is piecemeal until we are gone. One more quick one here. I started my poems with a poem about Stanley's hands. This is a poem called Hold Hands. It begins as a love poem, but it turns into something else. We have right now in our country tens of thousands of children in detention. Tens of thousands of children in detention. Whose children are they? One detention center is over capacity by 1,650%. How do you write a love poem with that? Hold hands. We were in the trees. White curtains opened, your shoulders in my hands, then your knees drew upward, rain like petals there, rain like breeze. Now the birds were in the trees 2 stories up, our window, where blowing leaves were level with our sheets. We were in the street. We were holding hands as hands were holding us. What hands they were hands were holding us. What hands there were where we were. In trees, our children there as songbirds were. The hands where we were in the trees were holding us there, where we were in the street. Please the rain, to please the petals in the breeze like rain. Please to draw your hair along my hands. Your hands are holding us. Lines along the window lane are holding us like songs, as now the songs, the sirens in the trees, lines along the window lane. Your hair in feathers where the children are, whose curtains singing, whose hands are holding us, who cry like birds. Hold hands. The birds are in the trees. The birds, our children, there in cages, singing in the trees. Thank you very much for listening, and I can't wait to hear Carl. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you, David Baker, for that wonderful reading, and thank you for the memories of Stanley Plumley, who probably taught a lot of us here in the audience. I'll now introduce tonight's second featured reader. When I first encountered poems by Carl Phillips on the page, I found them challenging. Such wild images, such leaps, such surprising turns. Then last February, I attended an online reading by Phillips hosted by Baltimore's Pratt Library. Listening to him read his deeply personal poems, I was enthralled. The effect made me think of standing waist deep in the ocean as a swell comes at you. If you let yourself float, the storming wave picks you up and carries you somewhere. I urge you to let yourself float on the language as he reads tonight. Pay attention to his titles, too, which offer clues and sound like no one else's. Responding to questions that night, Phillips said his work asks, how do you do this thing? Live in a body that is only yours at some time and navigate all the other bodies that are not yours. He told us he thinks a lot about Emily Dickinson because, quote, her subject seems to be a certain kind of complicated mind. And he said, I'm fascinated with how do you maintain a kind of restlessness of imagination, but also a kind of restlessness of the body. For me to have access to whatever poem makes a poem happen means to be utterly open to what you perceive. Carl Phillips is the author of 15 books of poetry, most recently Pale Colors in a Tall Field, published last year, and Wild is the Wind, 2018, which won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Other honors include the Aiken-Taylor Award for Modern American Poetry, the Kingsley Tufts Award, a Lambda Literary Award, the Penn USA Award for Poetry, and numerous fellowships. He has also written 2 prose books, The Art of Daring, Risk, Restlessness, Imagination, Grey Wolf, 2014, and Coins of the Realm, Essays on the Life and Art of Poetry, also Grey Wolf. And he has translated the Philoctetes of Sophocles. He is professor of English at Washington University in St. Louis. Friends, please welcome poet Carl Phillips.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan, for that terrific introduction. I love all that about the wave and the incoming building wave, and it makes sense to me, actually. And I've never thought of it that way. And thanks to everyone involved in bringing us here to the Café Muse series, Bonnie and Henry, and I'm sure there are many more whom I'm not naming. And I think I may have read in this series back in the days when we read in person 20 years ago. I was trying to figure it out, and I think it was in 2000. And I guess that's 21 years ago. So it's great to be back. And it's a terrific pleasure and honor to be reading with you, David. And I loved your poems. Congratulations on your forthcoming book. And it seems weird that this is like we haven't seen each other in a year, except this way. But all right. So I'm going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 3 poems from the most recent book that Susan mentioned, Pale Colors in a Tall Field. And then just because I've been reading from it a lot, I'm going to not read anymore from that. And then I'll read poems from my book called Then the War, which is coming out next year. So I'm going to start, and maybe it's appropriate that Susan raised the image of the wave because we have a trip to the beach here. To all appearances, we drove to head of the meadow beach because we'd always meant to and never had, and we'd been wanting to swim again. And we did swim. And it was as if all those years of surrendering differently, but with equal abandon to joy or sorrow, depending on which had come when and in what form, had vanished. We stood precisely at that point in being young, that's just before the moment, when what we expect is one thing and what we hope another. As I said, we did swim. We swam until it no longer looked like swimming, but instead, more like trying to rescue whatever inside ourselves had mattered once from ourselves by moving farther away from it. That's that. This next poem has some words that you may think, what? What are those words? I made them up. So actually, no, that's in the next poem. I think you'll know all the words in this one. Okay. This is called To Be Worn Openly at the Wrist or at the Chest and Hidden. If I believed in a God, he would be a sea god, like the sea in its predictability, now approach, now recede. Beneath such a God, I would not mind, I think, being the shore. Say of the sea what you will, it's the shore that endures the routine loss, without which, what strategies would there be for softening the hollowness that any victory, give it time, comes with? How curb the risk of arrogance with its doomed but not undangerous hound, complacency. I made this for you. Put it on. I know it's not going to matter whether the decisions I made were the ones eventually I even meant to make or should have thought maybe more than twice about. What's history anyway, except according to the latest mouth saying so, just what happened. I flourished undramatically to no apparent purpose, like pretty much everyone. The sea dragged the shore. The shore suffered the sea. All right, here's the poem where there are words that you won't know because I made them up. Why do you make up words, Carl, that no one will know? It's one of those rare moments, well, not rare, it's one of those moments in revision, no, rare. It's moments in revision when I thought, it doesn't make sense. And everything in me said, leave it alone. So I did. Okay, this is called On Mistaking the Sound of Spurs for Bells Approaching. By then, of course, they'd done plenty in the name of recklessness. Their word as well, though incorrect, for wilderness. Scotchweed, rush latitude, if not, why not? Strobigon, nor sheep fala shall graze. The way, incredibly, for most, it's still enough to have noticed a similar weather pattern between regret and the treeless plains of remorse. Like that must make them the same, or should, or at least no more different than a fetish for being eaten alive and whole is, apparently, from the desire to leave loneliness behind forever. A reasonable desire, I suppose, but in the end a useless one, since actual loneliness isn't leavable. Love distracts from loneliness. It doesn't crowd it from view. Some could almost see this eventually. Others chose not to. Some, the luckiest, arrived at, then clung to, that point in love where to be understood entirely stops being the main thing, or a thing at all, even. They could let the nights unfurl before them, one after the other, each a seemingly vast underworld of damage they didn't have to talk about. Not anymore. They agreed it was there now. They hovered over it. What light there was their own. All right, so those are 3 poems from that book. And here are 5 poems. It's a little deceptive. 5 poems from this other book called Then the War. It's deceptive because I'm doing that thing that I get annoyed with at readings, but I'm going to tell you ahead of time so you won't be annoyed with me. I've been to many a reading where someone says, oh, I have 3 more poems, but they don't tell you that the last one is like in 12 parts. And so it's like, you're not prepared. And you think, what? Now I've got a whole bunch. They should have said 18 poems or whatever. But mine is not in 12 parts, but the last poem is longer than the others. But on the other hand, the ones before it are relatively short. And anyway, we're here for poetry, right? Okay, this is called Invasive Species. Switchgrass, beachgrass, trespass, little song. Little song, years remastering truth, now begins its own truth. Little song, deep in the night. Not a wreath, more a crown, little song worn shyly. Past regret, little song, no weep, remembering, nor long for. Little song done with tears, though nowhere anyone not somehow hand in hand, little song still lonely, undaunted, unpersuaded. Persuasion a meadow once, violence the field, seeding itself with its own flower. For fist, little song. Up from the dragged lake of the singer's throat, little song, severed fist in the light turning. It shines in the light. All right, this poem is, I should have said, I don't say much between poems. I don't know what to say. So I say stuff like that. This is called He Didn't Raise Hand or Voice. I can say that this line, the title, He Didn't Raise Hand or Voice, comes from a poem by one of my favorite poets, Pamela Alexander. He didn't raise hand or voice. Maybe so. Or maybe it's only memory in the end that turns some men into flags. Anything from ownership to conquest to here I stopped to rest once, but I couldn't stay. While others, years later, past the otherwise mistake of them, become reliable compasses we still half hold on to, their bodies a forest when seen from the air in a small plane, so that it's possible to get close enough to see where the oaks give way to poplar trees, or where, if you follow the pines far enough, they open out to a field across which you can see the ocean. We couldn't have found our way here without them. In which case, where lies mistake at this point, and where revision? Last night, a friend asked if I could say, even roughly, how many men I've ever slept with. And when, unable to, I panicked, he assured me my situation is not uncommon. Tonight, I'm not so sure. The Lord gives to each of us only what we can bear, says my father, during the weekly phone call where I practice limiting myself to a single drink. One way, I guess, of maybe keeping my hand in when it comes to restraint. For once, I don't push back at him, his faith. If I can give him that much, why shouldn't I? If I say the giving feels impossibly just before I let go of it, almost like love, that's all I'm saying. It happened, and now it's over. They moved together in groups and singly. They moved among the trees, as among the parts of a language they'd forgotten they knew. All right. This poem is called Anywhere Like Peace. He's unbuttoning his shirt. We've never met before. He says last night he had a dream about me. A good dream, he tells me. A strong one, meaning I was strong, and that for the first time in years, apparently, he felt completely safe. To confuse closure with conclusion is nothing new, I at first want to say to him. But a shadow softness to his face brings out a softness in me that I don't show usually. It makes me want to lean hard into his chest instead, the part where the hair, faint still, as if still filling in, looks like two wings positioned where they shouldn't be, but on purpose, so that flight means for once not seeing the earth fall away, but the sky getting steadily closer. Let the body approach. Will I ever stop wanting more than what I've already got? I used to wonder, not realizing yet that's all ambition is finally. I thought humility would be a smaller thing, a quieter thing. It seems I was wrong about that too. I can't decide if it's just my being so much older now, or if it's always been true that winter foliage is the prettiest foliage. Here's a super short poem. It's called In a Field at Sunset. When he asked if I still loved him, I didn't answer. But of course, I loved him. He'd become by then like the rhyme between lost and most. All righty then. Seems this may not be a full 20 minutes, but I hope that's okay. I just tried to time it. Okay, I'm now going to read my final poem, which is long for me. It's 4 pages. On the other hand, it's skinny. I don't know. On the other hand, it has a lot of literary allusions. Don't be afraid. Because you don't have to have read any of these people. I explain it enough in the poem. So it's called This Far In. Like any spell for bringing everyone you've ever loved back, said the wind last night. What is it about nighttime and fragment seeming made for each other? It's morning now. The wind is just wind again, saying nothing, of course. The bomb cyclone, as it's called when there's a more powerful than usual mashup of warm and cold air leading to hurricane force wind events, hasn't happened yet. But there's an ominous bending and failing to rise up that the bamboo keeps doing that makes me think, sure, anything could happen. But when isn't that true? So many poems waiting for flight, grounded variously until better weather or until the latest glitch in vision, technique, both, that caused the latest disaster gets worked out. The way it can seem impossible during the intricate steps of dressage that the horses ever do things like trot into a barn or casually walk to the field's other end. Yet they do eventually. What's difficult resolves. Disaster is almost never tragedy. The snowbells that appeared overnight, or am I just not noticing them? Are only snowbells if I call them that? I could as easily call them, don't tell me the worst I'd expected is true, or lo, the queen's bodice borne unobtrusively aloft, or I can say it's spring again, with its first shy flowers, meaning color, not bearing, not mood. Hopkins thought flowers expressed devotion the only way they could. They turned toward the sun. From humans, he suggested, God expects more. No, is owed more, because we have more to give. Leaving out God and science, I suppose I get that. A version maybe of what Campion says, all do not all things well, as in, we do what we can. I had a house near the sea once, for example. Now I live where there's no sea at all, in a house with a yard filled with trees, among them this barren pear tree, from which I long ago hung a set of wind chimes designed to sound like a cross between a ship's bells and the sort of music tapped out by the rigging's cable blocks as they hit their masts unobstructed, sails down in a storm. If I close my eyes, it really can seem I'm home again. The sea not far, the wind in the leaves standing in for the waves getting rougher than forecast. Rough the way once you liked it. I can almost hear the waves choiring back at me like an accusation of what I don't deny, nor am I ashamed of it. Bring the boats to shore, friends. Lay me down on the shore. This far into the country, though, a boat's pretty much useless. Hence the pioneers with their teetered wagons that they called prairie schooners out of sheer nostalgia, already missing the sea. Is that nostalgia? Or is it more like what Xenophanes says, how if cows could draw, the gods in their pictures would have horns, the gods of birds would have feathers everywhere, each would brandish for stateliness, 2 wings for mastering a wind strong enough to bring the stars down, as we used to say, before to touch meant collision, back when sex was what mattered most, seemed to. Now precision does. Specifically, that precision with which love, felt honestly, deploys itself as if it hadn't planned to. So that it feels like chance. Chance as a boy with a sash marked fate across the promise that his chest is, or soon will be. Give it time. There's time still. The truth is, there aren't that many people I can say I have loved. Not in any way that matters or stands memorable, really. And of those few, I'm not so certain I'd bring any of them back. At best, they wouldn't find me anything close to who I was when I loved them, which is to say, I'd disappoint them all over again, just differently. So there'd at least be that. What is happening? They used to ask me. Could you rephrase the question? I'd sort of mumble back. In a way, it was like dancing when both people know how to dance. What I mean is there was grace to it, a real grace, despite the mumbling, which is maybe why it took so long for one of us to stop. If here, to stop doesn't have to mean letting go, more like, I am grateful for you. Let neither of us wish for or do the other harm. Let sex, for though I meant what I said about it not mattering most now, it still matters. Let sex be governed by that same restraint from any harm unasked for. It almost sounds like prayer sometimes, he said, describing light on water. He said it like the sort of thing after sex one simply says. Entering the body, pulling gently back out of it. Is that so little for a life to have come to? That, and the more than a few names long since scattered, like those leaves across which the Sibyl's prophecies are written clearly enough, if only the leaves would stop moving, if I could read and know for once what's left for me in terms of time, directions, of fortune, who I am. Who am I? The hero says to himself, looking past his reflection on the lake's surface down to where the darker greens give way at last to darkness. A light wind stirs the surface. The reflection trembles without breaking apart. As if this late in the long apprenticeship, when I changed my life, had stopped being a song anymore worth singing. I believe and refuse to believe that equally. Speak to me. Speak into me, the wind said when I woke this morning. Let's see what happens. Thank you.
So I'm going to just suggest a question that comes out of a couple of things. One is that the little song piece, Carl, is one that came up as a question in terms of, is this in a form? But I also want you to talk about word choice and whether you have any particular rules that you use for word choice when you do use a form. And I mean, I've noticed that both David and Carl, we're pretty limited on obvious form. So, but let's see where we can go with the question of form and where we are with that.
Okay. Yeah. No. I'm glad you asked. That poem, "Invasive Species," that one that keeps talking about little song. The only form I had in mind when I was writing it was I somehow knew that little song was going to appear in almost every line. It was going to become like this weird invasive chant.
Mhm.
But when I arranged it, when I wrote it, and then this often happens to me these days, though that last poem I read wouldn't suggest it, I realized, oh, there are 14 lines. And it's weird because I'm teaching a sonnet course right now. And so I guess maybe I'm teaching it because it's on my mind a lot. So yeah, it's 4 stanzas. The first 2 are 3 lines and the second 2 are 4 lines. So, it's a stanza by my 2021 standards, it's not Shakespearean or something, but yeah. Oh, there was more to the question about word choice, but I don't know. I don't know about what to say about word choice. How I come up with it. I feel like maybe I should say, David, how do you come up with word choice? Wasn't that effective?
Yeah, that was really clever. Thank you for that.
Uh-huh.
I don't, there's no answer that I have. Just like you, you try to make a certain kind of music, and you try to have the words attuned to each other in some harmonic, and to do that within syntax. Other than that, I'm interested in all kinds of idiom. I'm interested in science idiom. I loved that last poem of yours, whose title I can't remember right now. I loved it for all the voices, all the references, all the quotations that bled into the poem. And as that poem proceeded, its word choice, I guess if that's what it is, seemed to get plainer and plainer until you were back at the seashore, back at this very elemental existential place, looking into the water, looking into the abyss, until language just goes poof. I don't know if that's word choice, but it's a real dynamic progression from a kind of complexity to plainness. And I thought that was beautiful. What was the title of that last poem?
It's called, thanks. It's called "This Far In." And
Yeah.
it's interesting, it's not the most memorable title. But it's interesting with that poem because I realized it's not like any of my other poems. And I don't know, 2 years ago, whenever I wrote it, I was pulling out of having a very bad flu or something, and was finally able to actually sit on the porch. There was going to be a bomb cyclone, that thing I described. They had said there was going to be this meteorological event, and I had one of these rare days where I had nothing I had to do, and I felt very weak, and I sat on the porch and thought, I'm going to stay and I'm going to write. I'm going to see how long I can write one poem. And I don't usually do that, and with that much time, and the only interruptions were to walk the dog twice, and then I would come back and have to just write. And it's weird because I like this idea of having like high, and maybe this speaks to the question too. I like the idea of having like high diction and low. So, on one hand, you can be quoting Hopkins, but then you can be saying something like, who am I? Or could you repeat the question? Or just ordinary stuff. But I don't know, it might have been just, fever dream. But that sometimes helps for word choice, and the only thing that's strange to me about it is that it was written in very long lines. And when I was getting ready to put it into a book, I turned it into a super skinny James Scholar kind of column. So it's actually really skinny lines now. And I don't know, made a difference to me.
I do not see any further questions in the chat. So I think, we thank you for that. And I'm going to let Susan come back on and close the program. But thank you both for your participation. We all enjoyed it. And save the chat. You can see what people have been saying.
So here I am again. Thank you so much to David Baker and Carl Phillips for a really beautiful evening of poetry. I'd also like to thank my co-hosts tonight, Karen Alanier and Bonnie Naradze, Henry Crawford for managing the tech, and Michael Davis for the music, as well as the rest of our Café Muse team. Please join us for the reading by Karen Alanier on Wednesday, May 19th at Poets versus the Pandemic, and for our next Café Muse reading on Monday, June 7th. Thank you again, David Baker and Carl Phillips, and good night from Café Muse. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much for coming.